sometimes we forget about our internal communication within our agencies. So Pat's research is really providing us with some really important hooks and motivators for correct and really targeted messaging for our volunteers. So that's one of the reasons that Patrick's here today. Does anyone have any questions or any comments that you'd like to share on your experiences while we're waiting? Oh, we're all up and running, so let's go. Okay, over to you, Pat.
What I'm hoping everybody can see is my face in the corner and a sort of greenish slide with the Curtin propaganda and logo on it. Hopefully that's right. So before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge quite a lot of people who've all contributed to this project. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the Bushfire Natural Hazards CRC, who funded this research project as part of the Enabling Sustainable Emergency Volunteering initiative. And also my research collaborators, Dr. Daria Kracht, Jura Holtrop, Alex Lukshite, Hawa Mohammed Farid, and Marilyn Gagne. We're a mix of UWA and Curtin researchers. And I'd really most of all like to thank all the volunteers from the State Emergency Services in Western Australia who participated in our research, which included completing surveys and being interviewed. And without them, we wouldn't have anything to talk about today. So I really must acknowledge their contributions. Now, as a little bit of housekeeping, I quite like online participation, so I'm probably going to ask you to do, in fact, I definitely will be asking you to do a couple of polls throughout this presentation. The way you can access those polls is through the Poll Everywhere website. If you've got a mobile phone handy, you can scan that QR code. There's probably a poll active now. Don't respond to that one just yet, but it's just handy to have that access to the website immediately. Otherwise, you can, if you want to load up your web browser on your laptop, or if you're watching it on a laptop, you can go to pollev.com/FOWI, which stands for Future of Work Institute. When the polls turn up, you'll get to see that link again, so don't worry if you miss it at this moment. Okay, so just briefly, I wanted to just give an overview of what our broader project is about, and really it boils down to these 4 questions. We wanted to understand through our project, what does it take to become an SES volunteer? What keeps SES volunteers coming back for more? How do we get more people to volunteer for the SES? And what makes SES volunteers happy? So ultimately, we wanted to understand how to improve recruitment, the retention of volunteers, how to ensure that they're maintaining high levels of well-being, and also with the view to improving diversity within the emergency services more widely. Now, our research focus has been on the SES, but we believe many of our findings would be relevant to most other emergency volunteer organisations and sectors. Now today I'm going to talk specifically about the recruitment side and the diversity side, and this will become apparent why in a few moments. Just to give you a bit of background of how we got to here, prior to embarking on our first data collection for our project, we were able to access some historical data that the Department of Fire and Emergency Services in Western Australia had from their first year. It was what they call their first year survey, which is the survey they give to volunteers after 1 year of service. And we were interested in understanding what sort of expectations these volunteers had and what correspondence those expectations had with turnover intentions or turnover. And what we found was, broadly speaking, there were 3 types of volunteers, if you like. And one type of volunteer was we labelled overly enthusiastic, and they seemed to have sort of really grandiose expectations coming into expectations regarding what life as an emergency services volunteer would be like. And those people often were tended more than the other groups to report feelings of or intentions to turnover. Another group sort of had almost no expectations at all, and that group seemed to be relatively prone to expressing turnover intentions. But importantly, there was this group of volunteers who had a pretty good sense of what they were getting themselves into when volunteering for the emergency services. And so what we took away from that was, and I should say too, that group demonstrated much lower turnover intentions. So basically what we took away from that was this idea that it was important that volunteers have a grounded expectation coming into the emergency services. So what, more concretely, for example, some people, I think, when they think about the emergency services, they imagine, oh yeah, the people that are volunteering for that service will be jumping out of helicopters or abseiling down cliffs every day and doing, or getting into the thick of it all the time, and they may not be necessarily aware of the other side of it, which is the regular training, the meetings, the fact, especially in metropolitan Perth, we don't have a lot of emergency incidents, so it'll be the sort of the annual storm that triggers the odd call out. You won't necessarily be doing something every day of the week. So just regarding SES volunteers, I had a quick look at the participant list, and I recognise a few of your names. So I have a feeling you're going to have a pretty good sense of what the experience of being an SES volunteer is like. But if you wouldn't mind just writing a sentence or two in the poll, letting me know, if you have volunteered for the SES, this question kind of won't work for you, but maybe tell us what you thought it was going to be like before you started. And if you haven't, just give us a sentence which describes what you think the experience would be like. And hopefully they'll start appearing on the slide. Let's see. Might check in, make sure it's working. If you're having trouble accessing the poll, maybe just pop something in the chat if you haven't done so already. Oh, there we go. Worthwhile and meaningful. My screen, it's come out in microscopic font, but I can just read it. Hard work interspersed with boredom. Backup for other agency as well as storms. Being part of a team that helps community when they need it. A lot of car parking work. I didn't expect that. Supporting community in a variety of ways. So oh, there's another one, challenging and rewarding to help out those in need. So I'll press on now. I just wanted to make one point here. These sorts of sentences you're going to see other examples of this throughout the presentation. Regular training, but not necessarily lots of response. So this is really good, really important. Okay, thank you for that. So one of the goals we had in our research project was to improve the recruitment practice of emergency services volunteers. And given our research findings regarding the importance of expectation setting, we thought that really what we need to do is speak to this kind of dilemma that recruiters of emergency services volunteers face. And it's this dilemma. You have this trade-off between making the proposition of being an emergency services volunteer attractive, but also making it realistic, right? You can't just send really exciting signals to people, because if they turn up and discover that you're parking cars all the time, they're going to be sorely disappointed by that experience, and if they were expecting to jump out of helicopters and so forth. At the same time, you don't want to tell everybody, come and join the SES, you get to spend all afternoon parking cars, because then nobody's going to sign up to join the SES. So we felt that what we needed to do was find a construction evidence base that would allow recruiters to send signals that were attractive and appealing, but also accurate. And if we can also promote the diversity of roles and opportunities to potential recruits, then perhaps we can recruit from a larger pool of potential volunteers rather than the kind of traditional volunteer pool. So being organisational psychologists, we like to use data to guide our organisational practices. And to that end, we, as part of the CRC funded project, we put together a series of studies which aim to generate an evidence base for recruitment messaging in the state emergency services. Now, this slide's a little bit complicated. You don't have to go through the whole flowchart. I'll break it down one step at a time as we go through. So the first thing we needed to do was we needed to get some content. If we can't recruit volunteers without having something to say to them, right? So the first thing we thought we should do is generate a large pool of what we've called positive recruitment stories. And so the way we did that was we interviewed a large number of volunteers in the State Emergency Services of Western Australia. And we asked them questions like this. So what do you like most about, well, what do you enjoy most about being a SES volunteer? So why did you decide to volunteer? What would you say to someone to convince them to join the SES? And our goal was really to collate a set of messages that could be used in recruitment drives. What we're after is really positive stories about the SES. And we ended up with about 300 of those. Now, not all of those translated neatly into the sorts of messages that you could put into recruitment materials like a Facebook post or a poster or an advertisement. So we had to do a bit of a filter, but we also picked up 54 photos of volunteers in various roles and in various settings from the Department of Fire and Emergency Services. So what we wanted to do with all of that was we wanted to review them and refine them down to candidate recruitment messages. We ended up with 109, and we also had 40 photographs that we thought would be useful. So here are some examples, and some of them are very similar to the examples that you all gave to me in that expectations question. So people are saying, I want to get back to the community and make our area safer. Other volunteers are my family now. It's just good to get out and feel that you're valued. It's an absolute honour and privilege to serve the community in the hour of need when people are at their lowest point. So these are really nice, positive stories. And you can imagine if somebody was telling you that this is what the SES stood for, that might motivate you to consider joining. Right. We also had some really nice pictures, right? So we have SES volunteers out in the field. For example, this gentleman in the top left corner is jumping down a cliff for a simulated cliff rescue. But then we've also got other roles like this fellow here with their headset on, who is obviously doing some communications work. And you've got community liaison, so you've got 2 volunteers chatting with a householder. So the idea with these photos is we didn't just want operations pictures. We wanted to capture all the different types of roles that people in the SES can perform. Okay, so we've got a bunch of messages. What we need to do now is make sure those messages or the stories are actually going to work as recruitment tools. And the first thing we wanted to do there was we wanted to verify that these signals were realistic. We wanted to make sure that those messages that you saw earlier are actually representative of the SES experience, because if they're not, then people will be disappointed if they're recruited on the basis of these false pretenses. So how did we do that? Well, we turned to the experts being SES volunteers themselves. So we invited a large number of SES volunteers in Western Australia to review. We didn't give them all the stories, 109 is too many, so we broke it down into 3 separate chunks, but each volunteer reviewed 40 of those stories and also reviewed 20 of those photographs that I showed you. And we asked them to make 2 judgments about each one of those things. The first judgment was how attractive or appealing the story or the photograph was. And the second one was a judgment around realism. And we were really interested in this realism side of things, because we were counting on the SES volunteers to tell us what was legitimate and what wasn't. So if you had participated in this survey, you would have seen something like this. You would have seen a story like, everyone brings something different and unique. It doesn't matter what you're involved with, where you've come from, you have experienced something different elsewhere. You can share that knowledge and experience with the people that you're with now. So we're imagining that this quote could appear in a recruitment poster, but we just want to make sure it's attractive and it's accurate. So as a volunteer, you might say, oh, you know what, that's somewhat accurate. And so you tick that box, and that's very attractive, right? So these are the sort of numbers that sit behind the scenes in terms of working out what messages we wanted to identify for a recruitment campaign. Now, the other thing, what we found from that was we found different types of messages. There was one type of message which we called attractive, but really not that realistic. And I really love this message. It's one of my favorite stories from our volunteers. I got set up into the helicopter to put gear on the jobs and set up a rope system, but it didn't stop and the blaze was still running and I hopped out. I felt like the biggest James Bond person ever. It was amazing. Now, what a fantastic story. It's really like a really positive message to send about the SES, except for the fact that if you hear that story, you might imagine you'll be jumping out of helicopters all the time. And obviously that's not likely to happen very often. So it's an easy trap to fall into, thinking that this is the message you should send out to the world about being an SES volunteer. But you're going to have problems. People are going to be disappointed. We also found some messages that we classified as being realistic, but just not that attractive. So here's a couple of examples. You're probably not going to be doing these fantastic things day in, day out, but we need you trained and ready to go for when the big one comes. You've got to be prepared to do what you're told, because when it comes to some of the stuff we do, it can be very unsafe if you don't do it the right way. So these are, the other one I think I'd like to add to that is the one about parking the cars. Now, I think these sorts of messages do need to be transmitted. Like, a potential volunteer does need to be aware of this, otherwise they will be disappointed. But don't put this on your poster. Don't make this your opening offer, if you like. This isn't how you get people through the door. The conversation's important. We're not saying you shouldn't have it, but just don't put it front and center of your message, especially when you've got these alternatives. These messages here were judged as realistic and attractive. So you get to learn new skills and be challenged. Most of the volunteers we surveyed said that, yep, this is great. This is one of the best things about being in the SES, and it's also very realistic. You will learn skills and be challenged regularly. Giving back to the community is another example. So we ended up with a whole set of messages that fell into this category. Now, it's all well and good getting information from SES volunteers about what's attractive and what's realistic, but the thing about SES volunteers is they've already drunk the Kool-Aid. They've already signed up for the SES, and what we really need to do is attract people who haven't signed up to the SES yet. They're the ones we need to convince, right? We don't need to push against open doors. And so what we needed to do is we needed to validate the attractiveness ratings of those messages externally. We needed to get non-volunteers to tell us how attractive those messages are. The other thing we were interested in doing with our non-volunteer sample, I'm just going to call them a community sample now, is we want to understand what expectations are being created by these different messages. So essentially what we did after getting getting the reality check done with our SES volunteers is we went to a large sample of community members in Australia, and we used an online market research panel company to help with this, and they sampled from metropolitan and rural and regional parts of Australia. So what we did was we wanted to make sure the messages that we had identified were attractive, and also wanted to check what expectations they were setting amongst a large sample of non-volunteers. So what do I mean by setting expectations? Well, what we had was a very large set of expectations that we had identified through our interview work, and also that research I mentioned earlier with the Department of Fire and Emergency Services. And these were the sorts of signals that were appearing in the interview. So people were talking about how SES helps you overcome personal barriers, how some people join the SES because you get to meet new people, learn new skills, be part of a team. So what we wanted to do was check that whether or not, or the extent to which, those recruitment stories that I mentioned earlier, we're kind of creating these expectations amongst a potential volunteer. Now, why is it important to do this? Well, as I already alluded to earlier, if you set the wrong expectations, people will be disappointed and they will turn over or become disgruntled. But it's also, we felt it would be useful to understand how the different messages connect to different expectations, because we suspected that different groups across the country would have different capacity to meet different expectations. So, for example, some of our volunteers who had migrated to Australia and then become SES volunteers had mentioned that one of the great things about volunteering for the SES is they got to meet some of the locals. It was a good way to make new friends and build networks. Now, in some parts of Australia, I can imagine you'll have lots of people who have migrated over. Other parts, maybe not so much. And so setting the expectation that you'll get to meet the locals might be helpful in some areas, but not others. And so we wanted to be able to make that kind of distinction. So here's our full set. I should mention this slide deck. I'm happy to share this with anybody who wants them. So I don't want you to spend too long staring at this slide. It just shows that we had a very large range of expectations that we asked people to consider. And what it would have looked like if you'd participated in our research is something like this. You would have seen a message like this one. I just love the people from the organisation. I love working with the volunteers that we have on events. They are my tribe. One of the things I should mention here, I've written, in this example, I said, I just love the people from the organisation. Now, the original quote had from the SES, but one of the things we wanted to do in this study was to de-identify the SES so people wouldn't start using stereotypes about what SES volunteering is about. It turns out the stereotypes don't actually affect anything. I'm happy to get into that during the Q&A, but I don't have any slides about that. And so you would have seen a message like this. You would have been asked, how attractive is this to you? If you imagine yourself considering volunteering for an organisation, how appealing would this message be? And in this example, the person said very attractive. And also, what expectation does this set? And in this example, we've given the participant 4 options: challenge myself, attend regular meetings, be part of a team, gain various skills, or none of those 4. In the actual survey, we gave the participants different clumps of those 16 expectations you saw earlier. We just thought giving them all would be too much work. And so this person has said, well, having read that, I think I would expect to be working as part of a team if I was recruited under this pretense. We also did the same with the photos. So we asked people to look at the photos and rate how attractive that activity looks, and also what expectations does that set. And you can see different expectations here. So looking at this photo, I'm not really thinking I'm going to meet new people or gain qualifications, but I do think I will help my community, and I do think it'll be something worthwhile. And it's not setting an expectation about being involved straight away. Okay, so that's the other part of the data that sits behind what we were trying to achieve. There's some demographics if you're interested. As I said before, we picked up metropolitan, peri-urban and rural community members and remote community members. We really wanted to get that diversity of perspectives. From the SES, we had a larger sample of metropolitan, but we also picked up volunteers from rural, regional and units and several people who didn't say. We had a pretty good gender balance in the SES sample, and not so much in the community sample. It seems like the market research company has a higher proportion of women in their sample. Similar age group, a bit more variability in the community sample. Okay, so we ended up with, as I mentioned earlier, we'd identified 109 stories and 40 photographs, and after throwing away the ones that we thought were either unattractive or unrealistic, we ended up with 61 stories and 28 pictures that we thought would be good material for a volunteer recruitment campaign in the SES. Just to give you a sense of what it looked like, we had 20 messages that people thought really signaled the expectation that you would be in participating in teamwork and camaraderie. So here's an example. I really appreciate the great mateship that I formed here. 13 messages really signaled learning and gaining new skills. You get to learn new skills and be challenged. 8 messages signaled helping the community. Expectations. Volunteering has given me a chance to give something back to the community. And we had 7 that signaled doing something useful or worthwhile. So when you successfully complete the job, you've got that feeling of gratification that you've done some good. Now, I mentioned earlier, we had about 16 expectations. These were probably the big 4. These are the ones that repeatedly were being picked up by our participants, and they're the ones we chose to focus on for the next step of the research. Now, with the photographs, we found most of them really signal teamwork and camaraderie. A lot of pictures of SES volunteers are them working in groups. A few pictures signaled doing something worthwhile and useful, and others signaled helping the community. Now, what did we do with all of that? Well, we wanted to produce something. We don't just want to run off and publish an academic paper about recruiting SES volunteers and setting expectations. What we really wanted to do was to help the SES in the first instance, but hopefully we can roll this out to the other services with a bit more data. We really wanted to give them something that they can use to improve. Like if you imagine you're an SES unit leader or group leader, and you're thinking, I need to recruit, and I've got this problem where people turn up with the wrong expectations. What we wanted to do with this data we've got is to help an individual in that situation figure out what they should put in their poster that they stick in the supermarket pin-up board or on the school notice board. And so to do that, essentially what we want to do, you can translate this into what's on the slide. We want to help a volunteer group leader identify messages that are attractive, realistic, but also set the right expectations that will match whatever experience you can offer in your group. And to that end, we've got what we've called the Volunteer Recruitment Messaging Toolkit. It's like very alpha at the moment, version 0.1, and at the moment it looks like a glorified Excel sheet because that's essentially what it is. But what we would like to do, we're thinking of transforming this into something that's more app-like, a little bit easier, a little bit more difficult to kind of break, if you like. But essentially it looks like this at the moment. So if you're a volunteer unit leader, you can imagine you've downloaded this thing and you're on your computer thinking, okay, I need to make a poster which will be attractive. The first task they have is to have a look at these lists of expectations and identify the expectations that they think that their group can really fulfill. So if their group has a reputation for having lots of new people join from time to time, then a unit leader might decide, well, I want expectation 1 to be the one that gets signaled primarily. Similarly, if your group's known for being a real hub for learning and growth, then maybe expectation 7, learn new skills, is the one that you might like to focus on. So once you've identified that, what you've got here behind the scenes is, it might be a bit hard to see on your screen, but essentially what you see down here in the wide column is the column of quotes. These are all the different messages and positive stories that I was alluding to earlier. And then next to that, you can see 3 columns which represent the extent to which our community sample said that corresponding message signals that expectation. So let's have a look at this example at the top. The first message number 1 says, I want to give back to the community and make our area safer. And it turns out 67% of our community sample said that this really sets an expectation that I'll be connecting with my community. And so if you're a unit leader that's thinking, well, our group really likes to connect with its community, And so we want to attract people who want that or are expecting that. This is a really good candidate message to throw into a recruitment campaign. And you can see there's other expectations and other messages there. Of course, messages don't just signal one expectation. It's quite possible that that message will signal other expectations as well. And that's why we've got here in the Excel file, we've got expectation 2 also signals help my community and be part of a team. So you could, using filtering and so forth, you can, if you decide being part of a team is the thing you want, the main primary signal you want to send, you can turn the filter on, and then it lets you identify all the quotes that would be helpful. So at the moment, it's an alpha version. I'm sure very savvy, Excel savvy people would have no problems using this, but we would like to turn it into something a little bit more, I guess, unbreakable, if you like. We also have in there embedded the photographs. Now, the photographs are obviously SES specific, but we can imagine that the logic, it wouldn't be hard to extend this logic to an all services type of toolkit if we could get ratings of other photographs. And so forth. So imagine I use this photo because this gentleman's holding what looks like a radio and is presumably keen to send a signal out to the world. Well, what if that signal was a recruitment signal? So this person's job is to figure out, well, what should I put in my poster template to attract the right people? And the toolkit should hopefully give some insights into that. So let's have a look at what it might look like. So if this person was thinking, well, probably our number one offering is learning new skills. Sorry, mateship. I've got my messaging confused. Yes, sorry, meeting new people and making friends, right? So what this person would do is they would use that Excel file I just showed you earlier and take content from that and put it into the speech bubbles that you can see here. So this says, I really appreciate the great mateship that I formed here. And these photographs will be selected as a function of what that Excel file that I showed you earlier recommended. Okay. Now, some other insights that we've got that we haven't really had the time to do anything with, but we can see these insights being informative for, say, a future version of that Excel sheet, is insights into how different members of different groups regarded those different messages. So, for example, we found that women, more so than men, tended to find messages about being well known in the community and being available whenever you can be available and stepping out of your comfort zone. It turns out that men rated those messages as more attractive than women did. So if you're looking to improve gender diversity, for example, then these are probably good messages not to include in your posters, even if they're true. Don't put that stuff front and center because it seems to be a little bit less attractive to women than to men. On the other hand, women tended to find these messages more attractive. You get a great sense of ownership of the unit and a sense of contribution. It's nice to be there and we're a family. And I think doing something for nothing is important. So again, you can see how much nuance there is to recruiting. These signals may turn some women off, and these signals may attract more women to join. Now, there's a lot of work to be done in this space, but we've got lots of rich data that we haven't really gotten to spending time looking at. Similarly, across the different regions, so we found metropolitan volunteers rated these messages or this message more attractive. Learning new skills every week too that you wouldn't get otherwise. That's a buzz for me. And just learning new things and using them in everyday life, that's really special. So metro volunteers really love this. Regional volunteers rated these stories. I'll read out one example here just in the interest of time. So we can use people who can help with the everyday running of the place. We have to organize committee meetings and type up minutes. The other interesting thing about that quote that I just read is it also sends signals about the types of skills that are wanted. They don't just want operational volunteers. They want people to help with some of the admin stuff as well. And that just sort of indicates the fact that being an SES volunteer isn't just doing one thing. There are many different tasks and opportunities within the emergency services volunteering space, and a lot of people may not realize that. So maybe a message like that could help signal that, hey, we need other skills as well. So this is the next phase of our research. We want to have a look at how important expectation setting is in relation to the first day experience. So in our interviews, we picked up on a variety of different stories about what it was like the very first day you signed up to join the SES. And this is what we want to do now. We want to see how if I send signals about teamwork and camaraderie, and then you sign up and join, what has to happen on that first day that you sign up and join for you to feel like, yes, this is exactly what I signed up for. And and essentially what we're doing there is we're doing a two-phase. We're trying to again use evidence data as an evidence base for this side of things. We're doing a two-phase study. We've completed the first phase, but the second phase is a work in progress. First thing we wanted to do was we constructed 4 posters that were designed to signal those different expectations, those 4 expectations that I mentioned earlier. And then what we did is we sent those out to a bunch of market research participants and asked them just to type in a few sentences around what they would expect. If they looked at that poster and then signed up, what would they be expecting to happen when they sign up? And so we've got lots and lots of stories from people about what they imagine would happen. And if you'd like, you can have a go. In a moment, we'll have a go at doing the same thing. So get your phone or your polling platform up soon. And then the second thing we're going to do, and this is the work in progress, is we're going to see how we're developing a bunch of first day experience vignettes. So stories that we've lifted from our interviews about things that have happened on the first day of being a volunteer. And we're going to expose participants to a particular poster. We're going to ask them to imagine that they've signed up, and then we're going to give them a first day experience, and we're going to assess to what extent they feel like their expectation was satisfied or dissatisfied, and to what extent they would feel like they would want to stick around given their first day experience. So this is what it's going to be like if you're a participant in our second study. Imagine that on your everyday walk to work, you pass by a notice board in front of a school. Now, one day, a new poster catches your attention, and it looks like that thing that you've just seen appear in the middle there. Now, you zoom in, and it looks like this. Join us, become an SES volunteer today. There's 3 photographs. You're all in it for the same reason. You want to give back to the community, and it's just a great team to be with. Everyone looks out for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to let me know what you think that poster signals, and I've just put it up on the slide so you can see it while you're doing the poll. So looking at the poster, if you were to volunteer with that SES unit, what would you expect your experiences to be like? Teamwork. Collegial, inclusive, teamwork. Sharing. Fun and friendship, highly social, teamwork, mateship, diversity, working as a tight-knit team. So this suggests to me our poster is working because this is exactly the expectation we want our poster to set up. Being part of an inclusive group, great inclusive team of like-minded people. Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much for participating in that one. I'm going to show you another one in a second. I can get PowerPoint to work. There we go. So here's another one. Join us. Become an SES volunteer today. So imagine the post look like this instead of that one that you just saw. You've got 3 different pictures. You get to learn new skills and be challenged. So I'm going to ask you a very similar question in a poll. Let's see. Oh, no, I've duplicated it. Whoops. Okay, you can keep responding to this. Oh, do you think about the other poster instead? I'm sorry about that. I had 2 copies of the same poll and ended up putting the same one on twice. Adventure, demanding, skill. We're going out and doing exciting and challenging activities. A solid workout. Being outdoors, adventure, physical activity. Yeah. Being part of an active group. Beyond my physical ability, but looks like fun. Technical activities. That's right. So, so you're picking up on a very clear distinction between those 2 posters: saving people in trouble, challenging, and I guess this just sort of what I'm trying to illustrate with these examples is just how important it is that that the messages, how different messages can really send different signals about what the SES volunteer experience is like, and why, as a unit leader, you might sometimes want to transmit signals around teamwork, and other times want to transmit signals around this activity, this learning stuff, this getting your hands dirty, right? So maybe you need operational volunteers at the moment, in which case you really need to attract people who have that, who are physically able to do these things and are interested in these things. Whereas maybe at another time, what you're really looking to do is to grow the core of volunteers and promote and encourage teamwork and inclusiveness, in which case you want to use that other signal. Okay, so imagine that you just saw that first poster. Forget about the second one for the moment. Imagine you just saw the first one. I want to put your minds back in the space of what a participant's experience would be like. So you've just seen that poster. We've asked you what you expect to happen. And now it's your first day. You've decided, I'm signing up for this. This looks really cool. When you call the unit for more information, the unit manager invites you to come to their training night next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. So it's Wednesday. It's actually Tuesday, but imagine it's Wednesday. As instructed, you arrive at the Stone Smith SES unit at 6 o'clock to check in. It looks like this. You turn up, you go in, you're greeted by the unit and deputy managers, Steve and Carl. They have a quick chat with you before they show you around the unit. They show you the different rooms and where they keep their uniforms, trucks and equipment. Steve then asks you to fill in some paperwork before asking you to come to meet the other volunteers. So the participant would see this, then they see this. Afterward, the unit manager takes you to a room where they introduce you to the other volunteers. They're about to sit through a refresher course on flood prevention and preparation, and they invite you to join in. And you can see really friendly people smiling and waving at you as you join in. After the course finishes, the training officer instructs everyone to practice flood prevention and preparation activities. You're asked to join in and work with the other volunteers as a group. You've never done activities like these before, and you felt like you learned a great deal. By the time you're finished, your first session at the SES is completed. So essentially, what we're going to do in this study is we're going to manipulate that story that you just heard and embed different outcomes. So in this example, there's a lot of teamwork and a lot of learning new skills, but we're going to craft other stories based on real SES experiences where the teamwork is much less. So it's more individualized experience rather than a group experience. Or we can also manipulate it so the experience is much less focused on learning new skills. It might be rehashing stuff you already know or doing a safety course that you did in your previous role as a volunteer. And so what we want to do is see whether or not people's how satisfied they were from that first day experience. To what extent did they feel that their expectations were met based on what they saw in the recruitment poster, and how likely they are to return after experiencing that kind of a first day. So that's kind of where we're going in that space. And one of the reasons we decided to get into that was after a conversation with one of our end users who mentioned to us that one of the challenges is sometimes recruitment isn't the problem. Sometimes the problem is giving them a good first day experience. Especially after an emergency, you often get tons of people wanting to sign up, but then it's not often clear exactly how you should manage them on their first day and what's actually driven them to sign up. Like what expectations are they bringing to the table when they all sign up at once. So please stay tuned for the next phase of that. So this is sort of getting to the end of my presentation. I just wanted to quickly summarize. We've got this dilemma. Emergency services recruitment involves this competing outcome. You need to send attractive signals. You want people to want to sign up, but they have to be realistic. So you can't just send grandiose positive signals. You've got to manage people's expectations or they'll become disgruntled and turn over. Now, we believe as scientists that data really can tell us what signals are able to achieve both of these goals and also what signals work better with which groups. And then that last part of the study is what we want to try and show is that the extent to which it's important to set the right expectations, and also fulfill those expectations. So thanks everybody. Here's a lovely photo of my colleagues and our two little mascots, our SES teddy bears. I really appreciate you spending the time listening to our stories today. And that marks the end of my presentation.
Thanks so much, Pat. That's amazing. We do a lot of work on trying to make our messaging connective and really tapping into motivations, and this is a really great example of how that can happen. While we're waiting for some questions to come up, I do have one of my own. I'm wondering if you had, in the preparation for the SES focus of the study, whether you'd seen anything around how your research might fit into, say, a fire service, a volunteer fire service? Yeah,
that's a really good question. The honest scientist answer is we don't know until we see it, right? So what I imagine will happen is a lot of those stories I think will translate quite well. Because I have to say, most of the stories that when you look at the Excel file, there aren't too many stories that really make specific mention of SES activities. It just tends to be more general, like helping the community, or solving a problem, or getting together and doing something amazing. And I suspect that volunteering in the other services will be much the same, right? And to be honest, I expect that volunteering generally will be much the same, right? And so there won't be too many surprises there, but I could be wrong, right? It could be that there are differences. For example, in WA, we've got a different, well, actually, our climate's quite varied depending on which part of the state you're looking at, but a large proportion of our data would have come from metropolitan Perth, which has a relatively stable climate. And so maybe there's some stories that we pick up from other areas like that. Now the photographs, though, are a totally different kettle of fish. We're pretty certain that you couldn't stick those SES photographs into a fire services volunteer unit and say, hey, these things are good, trust me, you really want to. So one of the things we want to do is we want to get our hands on some more, well, two things. One is we want to verify that our hunch about the messages is accurate, and there aren't these differences. But secondly, we also want to run some tests on the other services using photographs from their services.
Yeah. Okay. And will you be doing any work around supporting units to ensure the first day experience is a positive one and it matches their recruitment message?
Well, what we're hoping to do, because we're sort of, our project's sort of in the wind-up phase, this is kind of the last thing we're able to do, and is that little study that I mentioned. So depending on what we find, we can give some advice around that. So, for example, if it turns out that really fulfilling those expectations on day one is important, if that's what our study suggests, then given the 4 posters that we plan to sort of put out into the world, we can probably put together a 1-pager on each of those 4 expectations. So how do you make sure that the first day experience really fulfills that teamwork need? We do have a lot of qualitative information from our interviews as well, and from our open-ended survey questions, and we're putting together a report on effective onboarding. But in terms of an evidence-based intervention style, like study of onboarding, that's a little bit out of scope. If depending on how this new CRC thing goes, it's an area we're very interested in studying. Like, we'd love to get a group of volunteers and study them, capturing that first 6 months of being a volunteer and figuring out why some people disappear in that period. Sorry, I'll stop rambling in a second, but one of the problems with this kind of research is when you jump in and study volunteers, you've got to buy a sample, right? You've got people who have signed up, they haven't left within the first 3 months, because if they have, they never discover that you've done a survey. And so you're getting a sample of people who have kind of drunk the Kool-Aid a little bit, if you like, and having a great time. And that's a problem. That's why a nice longitudinal study, capturing people when they first join and mapping out who leaves and who stays, I think is super important.
Okay. And you found gender differences in the way expectations occur and the messaging that might sort of help you match the expectations. But were there other diversity aspects that you found might make a difference to, say, people who are not from, like there might be rural, regional, city differences or cultural differences? Yeah.
So apart from the ones on the slide, we've got such a rich data file that we could spend our lives like looking for these differences, and we want to do that, but we just haven't got to. Our plan was, let's make a tool that sort of does the basics first, and then we can build a bit more nuance into it. And so I suspect there will be more differences other than the ones I put on the slide. But at the moment, the fact that we even found those ones, I think, is telling us that there's some gold in there somewhere to be found. We just have to mine it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Patrick? Well, thank you so much, Pat. That was really interesting. I actually think this would make really valuable teaching materials for communication students because of the way it demonstrates how you can, the research into your target group can show you exactly what sort of messaging you can use to make the connections, to really make them, draw them into the story and find out more and then take action. So really interesting. Thank you so much. So I hope you've all enjoyed the webinar. Our next one is on Thursday, the 27th of August, and it features another EMPA award winner, the South Australian Country Fire Service. And I hope we'll see you all then. There's going to be a short survey when you leave the webinar, so we'd really value your feedback. And anyway, I'm Barbara Ryan. We hope we'll see you next month.